Hello, this is KYC News. We provide you with the most up-to-date and reliable information for the day. First and foremost, we want to achieve perfect health with a sincere desire. Sri Lanka and Lebanon both experienced economic collapse. Currency collapse, shortages, triple-digit inflation, and escalating hunger are the disastrous results of such poisonous pairings. Long lines for gas. A middle class in ruins. A departure of experts who could have aided in reconstruction. Although warning indicators can appear for months, if not years, an economic collapse typically doesn't have a single catastrophic turning point. When it occurs, the suffering that is unleashed is overwhelming, dramatically altering daily life to the point where the nation might never be the same again. 12 nations, including Egypt, Tunisia, Sudan, Afghanistan, and Pakistan, may experience the same destiny as Lebanon and Sri Lanka as a result of the post-pandemic recovery and the conflict in Ukraine, according to experts. Crisis' antecedents. Years of avarice, conflict, and corruption are the root causes of the crises in Sri Lanka and Lebanon. Both nations had protracted civil wars that were followed by shaky economic recovery. Throughout this time, unscrupulous warlords and family cliques that had acquired massive foreign debt and obstinately maintained power ruled both nations. A political class that has long leveraged the nation's sectarian power-sharing arrangement to sustain corruption and nepotism has resisted numerous populist uprisings in Lebanon. Political dynasties that ascended to prominence through controlling militias during the war or through vast riches still hold the capacity to make important decisions. Political gridlock and governmental dysfunction have gotten worse among the factional conflicts. As a result, Lebanon has some of the worst infrastructure and development in the Middle East, and even today, 32 years after the civil war ended, there are still frequent power outages. The Rajapaksa family of Sri Lanka has controlled the island nation's politics for many years. Despite the family dynasty around him collapsing amid protests since April, President Gotabaya Rajapaksa is still clinging to power. The current difficulties in both countries, according to experts, are a result of poor development spending and large levels of foreign debt. Additionally, both nations have had frequent periods of instability and terrorist attacks that have disrupted tourism, a key component of their economy. Easter suicide bombings at hotels and churches in Sri Lanka claimed the lives of more than 260 people in 2019. Lebanon has suffered as a result of the civil conflict in neighboring Syria, which has caused about 1 million refugees to enter the 5 million-person nation. When the coronavirus pandemic started, both economies were struck hard again. Important moments. After the government unveiled additional planned levies, including a $6 monthly cost for utilizing WhatsApp phone conversations, Lebanon's crisis started before the end of 2019. The actions ignited long-simmering resentment toward the ruling elite and months of widespread protests. As the value of the currency started to rise, erroneous capital controls were implemented, shutting off people from their money. Lebanon's large debt, which was one of the greatest in the world at the time and was estimated to be worth over $90 billion or 170% of GDP, went unpaid in March 2020. The World Bank assessed the crisis as one of the worst the world had seen in more than 150 years in June 2021, when the currency had lost about 90% of its value. Gotabaya pushed through the biggest tax cuts in the nation's history in Sri Lanka, where the economy is still vulnerable following the 2019 Easter bombings. While a result, the nation's ratings were swiftly downgraded by creditors, preventing it from taking on new debt as its foreign exchange reserves plummeted. On the verge of bankruptcy, it has put in place capital controls and delayed payments on its overseas loans due to a severe foreign currency shortage. Recently, the tax reductions were undone. The cost of imports has increased significantly as the Sri Lankan rupee has declined by almost 80%, falling to roughly 360 to $1. The Prime Minister declared on June 22 that our economy has utterly collapsed. Disrupted lives. Both Lebanon and Sri Lanka had a middle-class population prior to this most recent decline, which allowed the majority of people to live reasonably comfortably. Many Sri Lankans worked as domestics in Lebanese homes during the 1980s and 1990s. They were replaced by workers from Ethiopia, Nepal, and the Philippines when Sri Lanka started its post-war rehabilitation. Most Lebanese were compelled to give up this luxury and others during the recent crises. People almost immediately discovered that they had almost no access to their money, vanished savings, and worthless incomes. The cost of 20 liters of gasoline or the rental of private generators that supply residences with a few hours of electricity each day cannot be covered by a month's minimum wage pay. Fighting over scarce supplies of oil, cooking gas, and fuel once resulted from severe shortages. These circumstances are currently repeated in Sri Lanka. Drugs for cancer frequently go out of supply. Even the paper for new passports ran out in the government earlier this year. Doctors, nurses, and pharmacists are among the tens of thousands of professionals who have fled the nation in pursuit of employment. Similar to Sri Lanka, where there is currently a severe lack of gasoline and other energy, state employees have been urged not to work on Fridays, with the exception of those required for critical services, after authorities announced nationwide power outages lasting up to 4 hours each day. According to the UN World Food Programme, 3 million Sri Lankan families are receiving emergency humanitarian relief, but nearly 9 out of 10 do so by skipping meals or otherwise stretching their food. Social media has been used by doctors to find essential equipment and medications. More and more Sri Lankans seek passports so they can travel abroad to look for work. Other catastrophes. Both nations have had tragedies that have exacerbated their crises in addition to the political and financial unrest. At least 216 people were killed and significant portions of the city were destroyed when a devastating explosion occurred in Beirut's harbor on August 4, 2020. The explosion, which is regarded as one of the biggest non-nuclear explosions in history, was brought on by the explosion of tons of ammonium nitrate that had been kept in storage for many years in a warehouse. Senior politicians and security personnel who knew about the deadly materials storage there allegedly did nothing to stop it. The conventional parties were largely blamed for the catastrophe because to their pervasive corruption and poor management, which caused wrath among the general public. Early in 2021, a container ship carrying chemicals caught fire off the coast of Sri Lanka's capital city of Colombo. Before sinking while being hauled to deeper waters, it burned for almost 2 weeks. More than 1,500 tons of plastic pellets were dumped into the Indian Ocean by the burning ship, which eventually turned up in dead dolphins and fish on the beaches. Due to the health hazards posed by the chemicals in the water, fishing was prohibited in the region, which negatively impacted the livelihoods of almost 4,300 households. These families have still not received compensated. The economy of Sri Lanka has totally collapsed, Prime Minister Ranil Wickremesinghe stated on Wednesday that Sri Lanka's economy has totally collapsed as the crisis-ridden country faces an increasingly grave situation that has left millions of people battling with fuel, electricity, and food shortages. Wickremesinghe stated to the Sri Lankan parliament that our economy has faced a complete collapse and added that the government was looking to its international allies and the International Monetary Fund, IMF, for assistance in stabilizing the economy. However, Wickremesinghe cautioned that in addition to shortages, the 22 million-person island nation was facing a far more serious problem. With its foreign exchange reserves at historic lows and money running out to pay for basic imports like food, medicine, and fuel, Sri Lanka is experiencing its worst financial crisis in 7 decades. The administration implemented a 4-day workweek for public sector employees in recent weeks to give them time to produce their own crops as part of the extraordinary measures it has taken to address the problem. The challenges encountered by many people in the nation are not being much alleviated by the measures, though. Numerous large cities, including the commercial capital of Colombo, continue to see large crowds waiting in lines for hours to buy petrol, occasionally getting into physical altercations with police and soldiers. Due to the gasoline crisis and rising food prices, patients are unable to travel to hospitals. The South Asian nation's basic food, rice, is no longer available on the shelves of many stores and supermarkets. According to police officials, 11 people have already passed this week while standing in fuel lines. In his remarks on Wednesday, Wickremesinghe, who assumed office just days after violent protests forced his predecessor Mahinda Rajapaksa to step down, seemed to assign responsibility for the nation's predicament to the previous administration. It is difficult to rebuild an economy that has entirely collapsed, especially when foreign reserves are perilously low, he said. We wouldn't be in this difficult situation right now if steps had at least been done to slow down the economy's downfall at the outset. The country only has enough fuel on hand to last 5 days, the Power and Energy Minister of Sri Lanka told reporters last week. Although Sri Lanka has gotten $4 billion in credit lines from its neighbor India to stay afloat, Wickremesinghe acknowledged that may not be enough. We have asked our Indian counterparts for more financing support. However, even India won't be able to continue helping us in this way, explained he. He stated that reaching an agreement with the IMF was the next stage. Our only choice is this. This is the way we must go. Our goal is to speak with the IMF and come to an agreement to get another credit facility, said Wickremesinghe. In order to obtain interim short-term financing before receiving IMF support, he continued, Sri Lanka is currently in talks with the World Bank, Asian Development Bank, and the United States. He stated that a team from the U.S. Department of the Treasury will travel to Sri Lanka the following week. China and Japan, two of Sri Lanka's major financing countries, would also be approached for assistance, according to Wickremesinghe. The world would once again have faith in us if we earn the IMF seal of approval, he claimed. It will enable us to obtain low-interest loans from other nations as well as loan aid.